For regular videos on ancient cultures and forgotten civilizations, please subscribe.
Hello, David. I'm wondering why you have decided to use BCE and instead of using AD and BC when talking about ancient times. I'd be interested in know what your reasoning is, period. Thanks.
All right, and thank you for your call. Yes, you're not the first person to ask me this. In fact, I get comments about it from time to time. So probably is a good idea to make a video about it now to answer your question. Why do I use CE and BCE instead of AD and BC? Most of the time, we never use any of these designations, right? We just say the number. If I ask you what year it is, you say 2024. You don't say AD 2024 or 2024 CE. No, and that's because these designations are only really necessary when it might be unclear which era is being talked about. And in my field, ancient history, that happens all the time, right? You don't know which era I might be talking about, so I need to tell you which era it is. Most of you know that CE and AD are equivalent. That is, they refer to the same era. So AD 2024 is 2024 CE. The same goes for BCE and BC. The numbering is the same. 500 BC is 500 BCE. So why do I prefer to use CE and BCE over AD and BC? And mind you, it is just a preference. In order to answer that, I need to go over with you how AD and BC came to be used. It is well known that AD is a designation for a Christian era. It's an era that begins with the presumed year of the birth of Jesus. Most people know that. The era was devised about 500 years after the time of Jesus. Up until that point, it was still the custom to date events Roman style. The Romans did have an era that they sometimes used, which is an era beginning with the presumed year of the founding of the city of Rome in 753 BCE. Ab urbe condita, they called it. But it was more common simply to date events by the regnal year of the emperor, or by referring to the names of the two consuls who held office in a single year. But Christians had an era that they sometimes used, one they used before, which was called the era of the martyrs, dating from the time of the great persecution in the reign of the Emperor Diocletian. Then came along Dionysius Exiguus, a Christian monk from the Eastern Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire fell during his lifetime. He weighed in on some discussions having to do with the correct date of Easter. And in doing so, he drafted a 95-year table of dates for Easter, and in that table, he used a new numbering system for years. He was adding on to someone else's table, which had dated according to the era of the martyrs. First, in a comment on the old table, he referred to the present year, his present year, as being 525 years, quote, since the incarnation of our Lord Jesus Christ. And then, beginning his own entries, 7 years in the future, he dispensed with the era of the martyrs and began his own with a year that he called, and this is the interesting part, 532. The next one was 533, and so on. Where did he get the numbers from? He counted from the incarnation of Jesus, as he calculated it, which refers to Jesus' birth or his conception. This is the first ever time someone named a year by counting from the birth of Jesus, that we know of. Now, how did he come up with this number? Well, there's some debate about this, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but it would appear he got a date for Jesus' death from an earlier writer named Julius Africanus. And then, figuring that Jesus was 30 years old when he died, the Gospels suggest this, He counted back 30 years to arrive at the year of Jesus' birth. Africanus had dated Jesus' death to the year 31 in Dionysus' numbering system, and therefore Jesus' birth was the year 1. Some people think that Jesus' birth year was the year 0.
For witness the birth of Christ.
But this is not so. In fact, there is no year 0. It doesn't exist. Dionysius started with year 1. But here's the thing. The Christian era, devised by Dionysius Exiguus, was based on a faulty calculation for Jesus' death. And historians now know that Jesus was not likely born in the year 1. Now, I know some of you in the audience will say, well, there was no Jesus. He was a completely fictional character. Just ask Joseph Atwill. Well, we're not going to get into the historicity of Jesus in this video, but suffice it to say that if he did exist, and the vast majority of historians think he did, and I agree, he almost certainly wasn't born in the year 1, as none of our oldest sources point to that year. And yet, this is what the AD system is based on. Mind you, Dionysius Exiguus wasn't trying to invent a new era or anything. He just created a system that he could use in his Easter tables. But in later times, it caught on. The acceptance of his numbering had a lot to do with the acceptance of his Easter tables. And so, over the centuries, as time went on, we will see some using his dating and others not. A rival Easter table had been made by a guy named Victorius of Aquitaine. Generally speaking, even after the Roman Empire fell in the West, the old methods of dating were still being used. But there came a point when some writers started using Dionysius' system not merely for Easter calculations, but to date historical events in the past. Victor of Tununa from the 6th century was one of these guys, and Julian of Toledo of the 7th century. They were historians who did this. Julian is the earliest writer we found who dated events before Jesus was born by counting back from year 1. But the person who made the new system of dating popular was the Venerable Bede, who lived in the 8th century. He wrote a church history, which he published in 731, and it used Dionysius numbering as a chronological framework. Throughout the 8th and 9th centuries, this book was widely read, and the dating system began to be adopted by others. But it took a long time for it to be used in all of Europe. It wasn't until the 11th century that it became fairly widespread. Some medieval scholars pointed out the error in Dionysius' date for the Incarnation and tried to get the numbering system revised, but by then it had already become so entrenched that there was no going back. This error is the primary reason why I do not use BC or AD. The first year of Christ, according to the system, was not actually Jesus' first year. And 1 BC is not, in fact, 1 year before Christ. I prefer to be precise in my language as much as I can, and I don't like to be historically inaccurate. The interesting thing is that not only do I get questions about why I use CE and BCE, I get angry comments. When I first started making videos and I encountered backlash for saying CE and BCE, I was surprised because using these terms is extremely common in scholarship, and I had been using them for years without anyone batting an eyelid. But I learned that in the public sphere, reception might be different. To be clear, I don't see this as some kind of competition where CE has to knock AD out of the running. I have nothing against anyone who uses AD. I don't go to other YouTubers and comment on their channel and say, you should be using CE and BCE. AD and BC are wrong. You can use whatever notation you like. This is just my preference. But people come to my channel very offended. Stopped watching the instant you went all limp-wristed and woke on me and said BCE instead of before Christ. The minute you introduced politics into your video was the minute I turned it off. CE and BCE are seen as an effort to actively remove references to Christ, though ironically most people think you're saying Christian era and before the Christian era, so let's not make changes along political lines. Leave it alone. See ya. CE equals cultural cringe and lack of respect for history.
Can't take this guy seriously. He uses BCE and CE. So how would you like your work to be ignored? Your use of CE and BCE is an offense to the monks who came up with our brilliant current calendar. Not using BC and AD is a disrespect to brilliant scientists. Sorry, you use CE, so I walked. BCE CE, opinion discarded. BCE CE, BS. I take exception with your habit to say CE instead of AD and BCE instead of BC. The Gregorians invented the calendar that the whole world uses. There is no advantage to arbitrarily dismiss the influence of Christianity on our timekeeping. You're using the same dates, you've just changed the letters that follow. This is scholastic smugness and is a high-handed approach to dating the past 5,000 years. Just say AD and BC and get over yourself. The Gregorian calendar is based around the birth of Christ. Changing the acronyms doesn't make it any more secular, just more dishonest. I'm obsessed with history and have no problems at all with BC-AD. Using BCE-CE instead is a cheap attempt to virtue signal to the PC maniacs who have taken over academia. This is fantastic, but please stop bastardizing the Gregorian calendar. It's the most accurate and complex calendar ever devised and took a huge amount of work. It allows for leap years and leap centuries. It deserves the credit for what it is and should not be used to make modern, woke, anti-Christian historians look like complete idiots. It's BC and AD, and I'm an atheist. Please stop this woke rubbish of such and such a year CE. It's AD and always has been. BCE CE, woke much? Thumbs down. Still capitulating to the woke nonsense of BCE and CE, before Christ and Anno Domini is the proper use. Oh look, a wokerati deflecting the issue and making it personal. Typical leftish tactic. AD not CE. I am from Leicester, so I know a lot more about it than you ever will.
I think the reason why some people say this is because there are numerous scholars who use CE and BCE because they prefer to use a secular designation instead of a religious one. And that's because today we have historians from all over the world contributing to scholarship, many of whom are not Christian, and they're not crazy about saying AD. So it is customary, out of respect, to use a neutral terminology. Some might ask, wait, I thought AD meant after death. That's not religious. No, that's not what AD stands for. It stands for Anno Domini. The Venerable Bede, whom I mentioned before, when referring to the years of this era in his history, used the expression Anno Domini Nostri Jesu Christi, which translates to in the year of our Lord Jesus Christ. And at some point this got shortened to Anno Domini. Anno Domini means in the year of the Lord. So yeah, it is a declaration of Jesus as Lord, so it's religious. But it wasn't the only way to say it. And why should it have been? Bede also used the expression ante incarnationis Dominicae tempus, which means before the time of the incarnation of the Lord, for the period prior to Jesus. It wasn't until the 1600s that the Latin expression ante Christum natum, before the birth of Christ, or simply ante Christum, before Christ, came to be popular. The earliest known use of the expression comes in the work of the French Jesuit Denis Petot in 1627. Some people think that because we sometimes call this whole thing the Gregorian calendar, that it was at the time of the implementation of the Gregorian calendar in 1582 that AD and BC came into being. But the Gregorian calendar was a reform concerning the months of the year. It had nothing to do with the year notations. And as we've seen, the year notation Anno Domini appears to have come into use by the 9th century, before the Gregorian reform. And the year notation Ante Christum, before Christ, came into use by the 17th century, after the Gregorian reform. You might be surprised. Before Christ wasn't used until the 17th century? That specific expression, yes. But it was abbreviated AC, and Anno Domini was abbreviated AD. The abbreviation BC, standing for before Christ, is an English expression, and so naturally it was adopted in England around the same time. Strangely, although they changed AC to BC to represent English, the English continued to use the Latin expression and the abbreviation AD for Anno Domini. So The abbreviation AD is at least 1,000 years old, but BC is only about 400 years old. Some people seem to think that Common Era and before the Common Era are modern terms developed by the politically correct or woke mob in recent times. When some Christians hear it, they react in much the same way as when they hear a clerk at the grocery store say Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. They treat it as some kind of affront to Christianity or an attempt to undermine Christian hegemony in the Western world, which it is not. In fact, not only does the expression have a long history, it appears to have been invented by Christians. The earliest use of the expression Common Era that I could find comes from none other than Johannes Kepler, the famous astronomer. In a book that he wrote in 1615, he uses the Latin expression Anno Erae Nostrae Vulgaris, in the year of our common era. And in works from 1616 and 1617, Ab Anno Vulgaris Erae, from the year of the common era. So Common Era also is at least 400 years old. In English, we find it for the first time in 1635 as Vulgar Era. The original meaning of vulgar in English is common. What can I say? Common Era is not a newfangled woke term invented by some university's DEI department. It's been an acceptable alternative for a very long time. But as I said, for historical accuracy, I prefer CE and BCE, and will continue to use them. I hope you can live with that. Thank you for watching. If you like what this channel does and you'd like to help support it, you can do this by giving this video a super thanks donation. Or if you want to help out more long term, you can become a patron at patreon.com/World of Antiquity. Whatever you can do to support the channel is always greatly appreciated.
You might like my little e-booklet, Why Ancient History Matters. It's designed to persuade people that the subject is important, even in the modern world. You might also wish to use it to help spread the word, so feel free to share it with someone you know. It's free for anyone who wants it. I've left a link in the description box below the video for you to grab a copy. Catch you later.